Hello, everybody. Evan Lane, Director of Law and Society, here today with my student, Andrew Shinsky, and we're going to be talking a little politics and the budget. Andrew, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hi, my name's Andrew Shinsky. I'm a first-year Law and Society student at Philadelphia University, and we're going to be debating the sequester.
We're not going to debate. We're more going to discuss. Discuss. And if I disagree with you, then it'll be a debate. Anyway, Andrew, why don't you set off some terms, because there's a lot of terms and definitions that I think people have to know.
Okay, well, first I'll define the sequester, which is essentially to remove or withdraw into solitude or retirement, seclude. Revenue, the income of a government from taxation, excise duties, customs, or other sources appropriated to the payment of the public expenses. And finally, debt ceiling, maximum amount of borrowing power for a government entity.
So let's talk about, basically the government is a business, is it not?
Yes.
And where does it get its money from?
Generally through taxation.
Taxation, whether it's federal income tax or Social Security tax, those type of things.
Mm-hmm.
And what does it do generally with its spending? It gets money in, what does it do with it?
Well, the spending as of now is very broad, and that's why it is very controversial, because there is a huge allocation of the money in terms of where our spending goes, such as the past month's decision for the Sandy relief funds, funded through taxation, as well as the $50 billion of new revenue due to the taxing laws.
So let's break it up a little bit. Tax money that comes into federal government could come for disaster relief, like Sandy.
Yes.
What are other just general areas where the money goes to?
Military, Medicare, which is for senior citizens, Social Security, which is a pension-type fund which people pay in through taxes in order to retire at a certain point, and things like NASA, FEMA, relief funds, Center for Disease Control, airport security.
So that's a broad gamut of
Very,
things.
yes.
And I've heard the word entitlements thrown around a lot.
Yes.
What is entitlements?
Entitlements are programs generally known as welfare, such as food stamps, welfare programs, pensions, unemployment, things essentially reallocate money through taxes to help people who are either in the poverty line or unemployed in order to get by.
So that's where our tax money goes to, all those different areas.
Yes.
Does the government spend exactly what it gets in?
Generally now we're spending at more than the amount we take in per year, especially for the GDP, which is our gross national product.
So if we were like individuals, we would have a credit card debt,
Yes.
basically. We wouldn't be paying every month what we owe. We would actually be carrying a debt.
Yes.
And with carrying a debt, we have to pay interest on that as well.
And it keeps exceeding its limit.
So when they said debt ceiling, I've heard that expression. That's been a lot in the news. Do you know what that means?
Yes.
What is that?
Maximum amount of borrowing power the government entity can take in, which is essentially once we hit a level, say 15 trillion, we're not allowed to technically take any more money from, say, either the private sector or from another nation to help alleviate our economic troubles.
So we can't borrow more money than
No.
that. It's sort of your parents saying you could only borrow $1,000 and that's it, no more than that. Okay, but obviously a lot more.
Yes.
Okay. Now, there was some sort of debate going on at the end of the last year regarding the debt ceiling and so forth. What happened as a result of that?
Well, the fiscal cliff, the debt ceiling, was succeeded with a final compromise for raising the taxes on the 1%, such as $400,000 for an individual and $450,000 per couple, which would help create $40 billion in new revenue to the government.
So they'd be bringing in more tax money.
Yes.
Okay. And when you say that it raised taxes, you would agree they were going back actually to the Bush era tax situation. They weren't raising taxes. They were actually retreating to a previous tax level that
To
existed
the
in the
Clinton
past.
era track, to the tax laws of the Clinton era, yes.
So it was a period of time that the wealthy 1% were paying a little less than they had paid years before.
Yes.
And now they've gone back to the original numbers.
Yes.
Okay. So now we understand all that stuff. Now, what is this sequester thing I keep hearing?
Well, the sequester is essentially a group of across-the-board budget cuts in almost all areas of the government, besides Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, and veteran benefits. The sequester is essentially $85 billion in cuts that the White House proposed, namely Blue, the current nominated Treasury of Secretary. And as such, it is essentially it was essentially supposed to be a negotiation as never to happen, so a super committee that the president and the GOP selected to come to an agreement. That's why it's called the sequester.
So as I understand, correct me if I'm wrong with this, they couldn't come to an agreement, the Republicans and Democrats. So they came up with this thing called the sequester, which is pretty draconian, pretty difficult to deal with, saying that we better get together and make an agreement, otherwise something very bad will happen. It's sort of threatening themselves in a way.
Yeah, it was put in place in the summer of 2011 as essentially just a way that says these cuts are bound to happen on March 1st, 2013, and if they're not averted, these are the consequences, $85 billion across the board.
Which is automatic, it happens.
Yeah.
So it's basically stating we couldn't come to an agreement, Democrats, Republicans, President, Congress, so forth.
Yeah.
So we're just going to put this in because we couldn't reach an agreement. And that's going to be cuts, about 50% of that will be defense spending.
50% defense spending, which is very un-Republican, as they're known for. They do like defense spending. Namely, most of the cuts are actually, due to the fact that they're across the board, will only be 0.3% of the GDP and 2.4% of government spending. So
you're talking about total spending. So the cuts on the Department of Defense will be 0.3 of our total costs.
Total, the sequester in and of itself is actually 0.3% of the GDP.
Now, you sound like you're pretty educated on this. How does a college freshman get interested in all these types of things?
Well, it started back, I guess, 2008. I went to see Barack Obama, and he was at my high school, so I went to see him with my mother. And because at that point, my dad was living in Indiana, working, supporting the family. And my mom told me that this is a person that would unify the country. And I listened to his speech, and then I waited till I was more educated, till my sophomore, junior year, and I formulated a different opinion. I thought, well, I don't really see the change and hope that he promised, and that's when I started to pay more attention and watch the evening news, and then decided which news that really formulated my own opinion, and then started to read books on morality of capitalism, Marxism, try to decide which better fit my opinion and my belief system.
And I would assume you're of the political point of view of less government spending is better for the citizenry. Would I be correct? Why do you believe that?
Well, I believe that you can't grow the pie if you're essentially recycling the money. You take money out of the taxpayers and then you redistribute it it keeps going on. So these government workers who are paying taxes are getting their own money back, essentially. So you can't really grow the pie. Most of the jobs in America are private sector jobs. So if you really think about it, it's not whether or not government is bad, it's why not trust it to the private sector who generates most of our jobs and leave it up to them who have proven themselves to almost always better use the money than the government who seems to have this addiction of spending.
So what I think I understand very well what you're saying is by creating a government job, you're not creating a business that will create jobs on its own.
Yeah.
But rather you're spending taxpayer money to come back as taxes again.
Yeah.
And it'd be far more effective economically to promote small business or larger business and make them or help them create more jobs. Is that essentially what you're saying? Are you basing that on any particular economist or any particular book you read?
Well, I'm basing that on, actually, morality of capitalism, as well as a lot of studies. People think large government works, and I would obviously say to them, hey, there are places where it does work, like Denmark and places such as England where people think it's working, and yet you look at the statistics and they show that it's still 55 billion pounds above the 2008 rate, which was adjusted to inflation. Mm-hmm. And now you look at their income taxes are higher for the highest earners, capital gain taxes, corporate taxes, and household sale taxes, and still the problem maintains. I think just bigger government, as Ronald Reagan said, bigger government, bigger taxes. You can't act like you're still for the little guy. You can't have these huge government programs and not think that you're misallocating the money.
So the sequester will force all these cuts.
Yes.
And bring down the debt and less government spending. And that's what you're for.
I'm for that, but I would rather the sequester was essentially meant to be a threat in and of itself, but these cuts are not well distributed. They're just across the board. They're not maybe targeting the real problem, such as, in my opinion, entitlements, which accounted for $1.03 trillion. And there's a statistic by the Bureau of Labor Statistics and Census that per household in poverty, there's $60,000 going to that particular household.
So what you're putting forth is that the sequester is sort of like taking an axe to the budget. What you would prefer is a scalpel with surgical precision.
Yes, I think at this rate, it's just a haphazard way of saying we need to cut the budget, cut spending, but it's not in a very smart way.
So how is this happening?
Well, I think there's the lack of compromise. The parties are just too far split, in my opinion. I think the GOP came to a compromise within it of last month with tax increases, which they vowed 20 years ago to never increase. So I think it's time for the Democrats to come to the table and say, you compromise on this, maybe we can lessen the spending, but then we'll maybe allocate the spending somewhere else rather than maybe defense, and we'll maybe take away 10% more of entitlements or 10% more of this education that's not helping the problem.
Let's talk about the media for a second, because you and I discussed this a little bit off air. How is the media portraying this as you see it, this whole controversy?
Well, Good Morning America graphics sound, it's 7 days to fiscal emergency. They're painting this picture of fire skies and collapsing buildings, but really it's just nothing but 2.4% GDP. I mean, obviously people will feel the impacts, but not in a way that it would impact the military workers where it's 50% of budget cuts, because while they're going to be laying off people, the military pay will still remain the same. New York Times warned $85 billion in budget cuts. They said the story began in a typically apocalyptic manner. Fear of U.S. cuts grown in states where aid flows, recovery seen at risk. So wide impacts loom on jobs, tax revenue, and schools. So I think this is just, it's not preposterous, but at the same time, they are painting this picture of just absolute destruction of the infrastructure that we've built. Crowley, as you know, was the town hall debate. Mm-hmm. She said, the administration's many liars, department heads, pretending the cuts will end the world as we know it. In the case of air travel, such as the FAA, which is surprising. She believes that the amount of cuts are actually still $500 million more than they were in 2008, and that the planes should remain and the security will remain just fine.
So why is the press doing this, in your opinion? Is it out of political agenda or sell papers or combination?
I mean, I think it's a combination of both. I think selling papers is obviously any business's goal. It's a corporation. They obviously want to make money, return to their investors. And I think if you see a caption that says apocalypse, fiscal cliff, or sequester coming, yeah, I mean, you might want to pick it up and educate yourself a little
What's
bit.
What's happening?
Yeah.
That's right.
So I think, and then you look at Fox News, per the usual, is painting a much less drastic picture, with the understanding these cuts are, like they said, 0.3% of the GDP and 2.4% of the federal government. But at the same time, rather than address faults, they're just portraying what the cuts will be. They were more interested in the feud between Boehner and Obama.
The
personal feud between the Speaker of the House and the President, I think, was definitely interesting.
Well, I'm getting that we're running out of time. I want to thank you, Andrew, very much. I would hope, at least I'm far more educated on this thanks to you, and I hope everyone else who listens gets more interested in what is an important topic, no matter what side you're on. Thank you, Andrew.
Thank you.